Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass, your weekly guide to developing commercial insight that goes just beyond the headlines. Each week, we take one major story and break it down to help you progress through three levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced commercial awareness. Whether you're just starting or already have some understanding, this program is here to help you think like a commercial lawyer. By the end of today's session, you'll have practical insights that you can use in applications and interviews. So my name is Daniel Shepherd, and I'm a law conversion student and a future trainee solicitor. And today I'm joined by Henry, a senior associate at Thrive Law with extensive experience in commercial contracts. And Henry will guide us through today's story, which, Henry, do you actually want to introduce us into this week's story?
Yeah, for sure. So, Daniel, we are talking today about AI and the legal implications on the creation of music. As those watching may have seen, that Paul McCartney has quite publicly sort of opposed the UK copyright changes that ultimately let AI companies use musicians and creators' content unless they opt out of this new sort of regime that's being mooted. And we've seen that the House of Lords, or specific members of, have kind of also opposed this and said, actually, rather than an opt-out method, let's opt-in method. So it's a really interesting time in terms of the rise of AI creation and the impact that will have on us as sort of lawyers and law firms from an IP in various other perspectives that we will get into.
So, as we start from this story, what are some of the key terms or concepts that aspiring lawyers should understand?
Yeah, so I think if we start before we kind of get into it, I think the main thing is that the key issue is the government effectively want to allow AI companies to mine online content unless creators opt out, and then we have issues that arise with that in terms of copyright and intellectual property rights. And sort of depending on what level you're at your sort of your legal studies, you may know a bit more or a bit less around sort of what these rights are. But I think if you're going into an interview, I think having a base understanding of that copyright kind of exists sort of automatically through the creation of certain works, and just broadly recognizing that there are intellectual property rights in the creation of art, music, is a good thing to kind of know. And this has kind of received strong criticism from sort of musicians like Paul McCartney, which has effectively said this could threaten creativity and the creative process. But we are still going through the consultation process at the moment. The government is looking to get industry feedback. So again, this is one of those stories that, as we've had previously, that we're talking about it now, but as the consultation kind of goes through the process, what the position looks like now to what it looks like in 6 months when you might have your interviews, we could have switched from this opt-in model, opt-out, to opt-in. So yeah, it's one to follow for sure.
And before we move on to the intermediate level, what different areas of law does this story kind of interact with, and what areas kind of can we look out for as we go through the levels?
Yeah, for sure. So again, the obvious one is intellectual property rights. That's the huge, big issue here that we are going to be talking about. But there are also sort of ethical considerations to kind of bear in mind in terms of licensing AI created work. Then we get the issues of potential sort of defamation that arise if, say, for example, Daniel, in 10 years' time, you're a super famous singer, and somebody then uses your voice and creates a song that actually is defamatory in some way and kind of paints you out in a bad way. You don't want your brand, your reputation attached to that. So then we have brand management, reputation management, and all of those sort of key issues. And then alongside the actual drafting of the contracts in terms of how do I get rights to use that? How am I going to be paid by these AI companies who are using my sort of creative works?
Nice. Well, fingers crossed I won't be judged upon my karaoke skills in the near future. That'd probably be for the best. So at the beginner level, the goal is to understand the basics, what's happening and why it's broadly important. This foundation is crucial for moving into a deeper business and legal impacts. So now that we've understood the basics, let's explore how this impacts specific industries and why legal guidance is needed. So, Henry, how do these sort of different areas that come into play within this case, and what kind of what role do law firms play in helping like navigate this?
Yeah, for sure. So if we kind of, as you mentioned, Daniel, if we move into the sort of intermediate level, we can kind of address more of the nuanced commercial and legal concerns. And again, a lot of these will be around licensing of rights, royalties, which is how the artists get paid, the impact that AI can also have on sort of the competition within the music industry. So say, for example, we get one huge AI company that basically mines all of the top music tracks, whatever. Do they then become a monopoly? How does that work? How is that going to sort of be regulated? Because ultimately, the back end of this is there is a commercial element to it, that being there is money to be made off artists. And if it can be done in a way that uses AI to make it easier for organizations, of course they're going to want to do that, but that then comes at the expense of the artist, because the music industry is huge. I think I read somewhere it's worth over 120 billion kind of annually, which isn't a small sum to be sniffed at. So lawyers need to be kind of considering what are the contracts that are being drafted with these music record companies, what is the sort of the revenue sharing model going to look like with the AI company? How are we going to license this? And then it's just going to be a case of drafting the contracts to kind of reflect this and sort of the new change in how this is going to look, because ultimately AI is going to have a huge impact in. It's a buzzword at the moment, and I'm sure it's coming up a lot of commercial awareness stories that those that are prepping for interviews will be considering, but it's going to have so many profound impacts in the way that we do things. And ultimately, whilst we can say it's going to make life easier in some ways, what are the implications of that? What do we have to do in terms of drafting the contracts? Because, for example, your client could be one of these huge AI tech companies that want to be able to have access to all of this creator and musician music. But conversely, you could also be representing some of the biggest artists that actually, you could be representing Paul McCartney, for example, that wants to advocate for rights being protected. So then you kind of have to flip your mindset from how can we maximize profits to actually what's the ethical considerations? How can we protect our artists? What sort of provisions should we be putting into our contracts to ensure that they're protected? And then also, how do we balance that between infringing or having a fair right to use of certain creative works to then actually infringing somebody's intellectual property rights? Where do you draw the line? Are we going to see an increase of sort of IPR claims? I think that remains to be seen, but I think it's definitely a space to be watching.
And kind of what are some of the like legal challenges that law firms and lawyers are likely to encounter when looking at these sorts of cases?
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest issues, again, will be around the IPR rights and the cases that may come.
Just for those listening, what does IPR
Sorry,
stand
yes,
for?
intellectual property rights, which it encompasses trademarks, copyright, and various other rights that you have basically off the patents, all of those things, and they kind of sit with different ones. But in this space, copyright is probably one of the most prevalent issues. You might have seen that YouTubers talk about getting a copyright strike on their accounts. That's because they've used music, say from whoever your favorite artist is, more so than what's a fair right to use that. So they then just get struck down for that. But this might have an impact on that and how this looks. But yeah, key issues, again, we're focusing around sort of competition and how the AI companies work. We're looking at potential intellectual property right challenges. We are looking at negotiating huge agreements, because you're going to have the huge, like Warner Music, Universal, all of those big guys probably sort of brokering deals with AI companies and artists. So there's going to be a huge sort of intersection of all of this. But then we'll get into this in the advanced stage. But then we also have the added layer of different regulatory landscapes in different jurisdictions, because you, me, all of us watching this listen to artists that are outside of like the city, the country that we live in. So how does that work in terms of what do the intellectual property rights look like across the board?
And before we kind of go down the AI rabbit hole that we probably will do in the advanced level, from the perspective of a firm, how can they use technology such as legal tech or AI? How is that used in how they manage these sort of cases?
So in terms of, do you mean these sorts of cases in terms of basically kind of practice management? And if you've got like a huge case going on, what tools can we use? I think that's a really interesting question. I think we're seeing a bigger discussion around law firms using AI at the moment. I cannot recall for the life of me the name of the firm, but one firm recently announced that they wanted their lawyers to stop using ChatGPT, which ChatGPT is open source. You cannot be putting client confidential information into ChatGPT. Of course you cannot. That's fundamentally stupid. But I think we are going to see law firms use platforms like CoCounsel, like, for those that don't know, CoCounsel is developed by Thomas Reuters, I believe, who create PLC, and that can help generate drafts of documents, which of course lawyers will still need to review. But if you're navigating a huge contract like this, using AI to help kind of pull the bolts together, and then you can get into kind of the nuances around that. I think we're still a bit of a way away from that right now, but I think over time, law firms, those law firms that want to be working with clients that are in this space, that are using AI, that are building these platforms, are going to need to not only just understand it, not only understand the implications, but also actually be using it.
That's brilliant. I'm sure that we're in the advanced level, we'll be going more into the actual practical side of how AI is working in this space. But at the intermediate level, think about how businesses are affected and how law firms support them. This is where you can connect commercial awareness issues to practical legal work. So now that we're moving on to the advanced level, let's think strategically. What proactive advice might law firms offer to their clients in cases like this, not only to manage risks, but also seize potential opportunities?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, in terms of the advanced level, we can kind of get more into that sort of intersection of AI, music, intellectual property, and these sort of changing regulatory landscapes. I think one of the biggest points around this conversation in terms of AI, Paul McCartney, and music and intellectual property rights is what the House of Lords have said in terms of switching from an opt-out to an opt-in model. And I think law firms need to kind of be thinking strategically around this. And I'm sure this will come up in the consultation process, how this would actually look, because if you've got an opt-out model, again, it's one of those things that you automatically opted in. You may not even, if you're an emerging artist, you perhaps not know that you're opted in. And realistically, how feasible is it for an individual artist to monitor their work, their creative works across multiple different platforms? How do they opt out? What happens? Is it just like a click and unsubscribe? Would it be a more artist-friendly approach, as suggested by the House of Lords, to have an opt-in? So if you're a lawyer acting for artists and representing artists in these feedback sessions, this is what you are going to sort of be pushing for and advocating for sure.
So obviously, when we look at these sort of cases, what sort of legal strategies can help clients gain a competitive advantage in these sort of claims? Obviously, we're talking about the opt-in and opt-out models. How do they kind of differ with legal strategies in that sense?
Yeah, I think because this is still very much an ongoing kind of discussion, I think to ensure that your clients are being kind of at the forefront of your thought process and how lawyers can kind of get ahead is to make sure that you as a lawyer yourself, you're staying ahead, you're finding out what's going on, you're thinking strategically about this. Whilst you can speculate, you can kind of gauge what would happen if this happened, or if this were to happen to my client, how could we protect them? But also you want to be in a position where lawyers themselves, in terms of negotiating contracts, whenever it gets to that point, you're still, again, if we're acting for the musician, for example, we want to make sure that your client is always your priority and you're safeguarding and minimizing their exposure to risk. That's ultimately what our role is, to mitigate client risk. But we also don't want to do so in a way that kind of stifles one creativity into innovation in, say, the AI space, because that's another thing that I think artist law firms and other industries will massively benefit from. So that's just another thing that us as lawyers need to be mindful of in terms of considering this sort of AI space.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back a little bit to what we talked about in the beginning with how many different areas cases like this will affect. Yeah. And obviously, if you make a huge decision in the case of AI and music, it'll have such a knock-on effect in different areas that, yeah, I think that's very important. But I feel like now, should we talk about the regulatory frameworks and how firms can operate and help clients with, so obviously, as we said before, with music being such a mass consumed thing across borders, how can they help clients in that sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's going to be, again, it remains to be seen. And at the moment, there are so many different ways that we listen to music, consume content, and the IPR sort of ownership around that is crazy. But we're definitely going to see sort of the UK government as it stands and various international bodies in various different jurisdictions likely to kind of introduce regulations to, one, not only just kind of address the challenges that AI possesses in terms of the intellectual property space, but also around sort of copyright infringement and AI ethics, because we can't sort of have basically a free-for-all, because there would be no incentive for creators to create. And also you could then just use AI to generate generic music. So kind of law firms need to sort of be staying ahead in terms of the regulatory developments of what's happening, what this is looking like, and provide forward-looking advice to clients. There is no point in, let's just say, in 3 months' time, saying to your client, by the way, a couple of months ago, the House of Lords said, oh, why don't we do a opt whatever, and rather than this, Paul McCartney stood up and said, we don't like it. That's too late. That's happened. This space moves so fast. Our clients are moving in spaces that are so sort of fast-paced and constantly ongoing. You need to be checking regularly. If this is your area of law that you're interested in, is this your practice area, you should kind of be on top of the game in terms of, okay, this white paper is being published next week, this consultations happening, let's find out. And if you're a student, if you are a future trainee or if you're going into interviews, you don't need to be going into it in such a granular level that a law firm partner who is a client relationship manager would be going into it. But you can follow a story and still kind of get an understanding of what's going on. Or if there is something that's really condensed, you will find that a lot of law firms will write pieces on these topics, what the implications are. So you can kind of have a read of that and think, okay, if the law firm is thinking of that, then they're the sorts of things that I should be thinking of when it comes to mock scenarios around what are the key issues that you would advise to your clients in this situation. So by reading what firms are writing already, you can kind of get an understanding of the sort of questions you should be thinking about. And this will just build your confidence in terms of kind of that critical analysis, commercial awareness, which will put you in like amazing stead when you sit at your desk on your first day of your training contract.
Yeah, I think I've seen quite a lot with law firms, probably especially around like the AI space. I know there's been quite a lot with AI and music over the last few months. Yeah. I think LinkedIn is kind of full of different firms posted about such things. So, but I think this actually leads on to the next question quite nicely. What are the challenges and opportunities for law firms for taking on these kind of cases? So how they position themselves in what like kind of the cases that they take and almost the strategies and directions that they wish to take.
I genuinely think that AI is likely to, and no, not even likely, it will completely sort of disrupt the music industry. We're already seeing that. It's going to disrupt it in a sense of production, distribution, and consumption. And it's going to raise a whole host of new questions around sort of intellectual property rights, royalties, what payment structures look like, I can't remember who it was, what's her name? Like Taylor Swift, for example, she re-released a load of her music because of sort of US copyright law and how that all looked. I think that was a huge shift in how the industry looked. And then off the back of that, industry or artist contracts then had prohibition clauses within their contracts that says you're not allowed to re-record or own your masters, whatever, for X amount of years. I think we're going to see contract provisions like that, not exactly the same, but AI specific. But I think the introduction of AI in the music space is going to have such a profound impact that there will be new provisions put within contracts that will be sort of negotiated. And again, that's where it'll be for the law firms to kind of advise clients on sort of these new forms of kind of monetization through AI, these new sort of protections through AI. And I think we're just going to kind of evolve into a space where kind of AI is ever more dominant. So it's also ultimately just around sort of balancing risk.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely right, especially with the way that AI is helping with like the consumption of music. I know certain apps have like an AI DJ on in which it kind of selects your playlist, and sometimes it definitely throws the same artist at you way more than you'd actually expect it to. So it's definitely shifting the way in which it means that you consume playlists. And I also have recently seen that certain companies have been alleged, I'll say that out there, they have been creating AI music and filling up their playlists with said music, especially on stuff like jazz playlists or lo-fi playlists, specific non-like vocal stuff, that they've been filling those playlists with those works. Is you'll see that the artist has only been releasing music since 2024, but they somehow have 30 albums. Like that kind of thing, in which it's definitely making a shift.
I completely agree. And what you can do is, say, for example, I wanted to use your voice to release a song. I could just mine the internet, find videos and clips of your voice, throw it into an AI system, and then whack out a beat. You're singing on it. You've not given me a complete lyric, but because you can just use AI and use your voice, you see it on platforms like TikTok and stuff all the time, where artists are singing songs that they've not sung. It's a complete different artist's song, but using AI, they can do that. And that's obviously a huge ethical concern then within the music, exploitation of works without proper consent. We need strategies then to kind of manage sort of brand reputation, brand image, as we touched on earlier. And I think the consultation for what the government is proposing is going to be a very interesting sort of story to follow. And it's one that I think a lot of law firms will definitely be kind of honing in on.
Yeah, and I think you see something quite similar in the kind of film and television movement with AI, because I know obviously I think it was Bruce Willis that opted in to have his likeness used by AI, and also people have, I think Albert Einstein used like his like estate used it for certain adverts and things like that. So I think the opt-in approach has definitely been adopted for film and television, where it's more visual and you can see exactly who the inspiration is for certain works. But obviously it's a little bit more cloudy, in which an AI is taking bits and pieces from several works and it's kind of hard to trace back.
Yeah,
about where you
Yeah, and then
it.
it's on to the point then of sort of managing the various different regulatory remits sort of across what the US does and what the UK does and what the EU also does, and what's the sort of international kind of approach to a kind of cross-jurisdictional sort of copyright and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, I think this is definitely one to watch. I'll be following it for sure because I find this space sort of fascinating. And I think that we are just going to see more and more of this. But I think Paul McCartney and various other musicians are right to be raising concerns around this, because it's a balancing act of allowing musicians to create in a way that is their livelihood and it's authentic to them, but also using tools and platforms that we can't really just turn off. They're not going anywhere. So it's trying to find a space that allows both to work cohesively, but also within the parameters of the law. And it's a case of the law kind of keeping up, as always, with sort of the changes that are ahead.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think over the last few weeks, kind of the keeping up of the law with certain, over the last few Compass sessions, that's kind of been a theme in which the law trying to keep up with technology is kind of been the thing to definitely look out for in this. Well, thank you so much for your time, Henry. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
And as we close out, at the advanced level, it's about thinking like a commercial advisor in future challenges and helping clients position themselves advantageously. So thank you for joining today's Commercial Awareness Compass. Remember, commercial awareness isn't just about keeping up with the news. It's about understanding why events matter to clients and how law firms provide strategic value. Whether you're at the beginner, intermediate, or advanced level, always ask yourself, how does this impact clients and what can a law firm do to help? Join us next week to keep building your commercial awareness. And until then, prepare without the panic. Thank you.